This episode is brought to you by Dogfish Head Craft Brewery. The Grateful Dead and Dogfish Head have gotten the band back together with the release of Grateful Dead Juicy Pale Ale, a light-bodied pale ale brewed with sustainable Kernza grains, granola, and heaps of good karma for a refreshing brew that's music to your taste buds. Available nationwide. Visit dogfish.com to find Grateful Dead Juicy Pale Ale in your neck of the woods. Dogfish Head Craft Brewery is located in Milton, Delaware. Please drink responsibly.
We see you getting after your fitness goals. But what about those money goals? You can count on Credit Karma for a clear view of your finances and your progress, helping you see results so you can keep checking off those financial personal bests and find your way to money. Progress never felt so good. Intuit Credit Karma. Karma you can count on. Download the app today.
Hello and welcome to Something About the Beatles, number 238. They're really piling up, aren't they? Well, for this show, which is the first sponsored by BetterHelp, who I will talk about more later on in the show, so welcome aboard to them. This is something that was recorded as a Q&A with live questions fired at us by the listeners as part of Fab4Con Jam in 2021. It is a conversation with Chris O'Dell and Nancy Lee Andrews. And if you don't know, Nancy Lee Andrews was with Ringo from 1974 to 1980 as his intimate companion, let's say, fiancé for a time. And Chris O'Dell was right in the middle of Apple, having been recruited personally by Derek Taylor when he knew her on the West Coast. Both ladies witnessed a ton, have great friendships with a lot of the key players in Beatle world, including the ex-Beatles themselves, as well as are authors of terrific books. Chris O'Dell's book was titled, naturally, Miss O'Dell, Hard Days and Long Nights with the Beatles, the Stones, Bob Dylan, and Eric Clapton. It is a terrific insider account of her days from the years of Apple, 68, through her subsequent dismissal at the hands of Alan Klein, her life at Friar Park with the Harrisons, and then onward as a tour manager and working with record labels and other associated business tasks following her Apple years, on through obviously the Stones and Clapton, as she mentions there. But it is a great, great read. It is such a detailed, enjoyable book that I highly recommend you guys track down and find. It is that good. If you like the sort of insider stuff, nobody better than her. She was a very articulate and sharp-eyed observer who, in the Best Pattie Boy tradition, was also a rock muse, as was Nancy, in terms of having songs written about her, including Miss O'Dell, from George, B-side of Give Me Love in 1973. Nancy, in addition to everything else she's got going on for her, she was a model, and she had a ringside seat to a lot of what was going on in rock pretty early on, well before she was drawn into the Beatles' orbit. This I know from personal conversations I've had with her regarding the Airplane and the Doors, and subsequently the ensemble known as Delaney and Bonnie and Friends, which later on became Derek and the Dominoes, spearheaded by Eric, of course, due to her relationship with bassist Carl Radle during some of those years. In any event, in addition to all that stuff, in addition to being, she worked for Ode Records, a imprint of A&M, as she talks about in this conversation, but she was also a world-class photographer. Always had a camera with her, was always snapping away, and did that fantastic book a while back, A Dose of Rock and Roll. Lots of Ringo pictures, of course, but lots of pictures of all the key players here that she knew were part of her daily life. Paul and Linda and George and Ringo, of course, and Clapton, and you name it. Some Friar Park stuff. Great, great stuff between both of these ladies who really know how to dish when it comes to talking about their lives. So we set them up for the Fab4Con event to take questions from the audience. And the audience really came through, and these women came through. It was a delight to have them. I am so thrilled to have them in my life as friends. And regarding Fab4Con, there's definitely some unfinished business, but with the bringing aboard of a sponsor and other things that are coming my way, the pieces are all coming together. So we will take care of that unfinished business going forward, as well as start planning the next one. But in any event, this was the conversation. It was a terrific one. Welcome aboard to BetterHelp, and onward and upward.
Something that intrigued a lot of people when the Beatles were performing on the roof, why Linda McCartney and Pattie Boyd weren't there. And you immediately texted Pattie to get an answer out of her and reported it to the rest of us, which people were saying it gave them chills. It was just so cool that you were able to pull that off. As a follow-on to that, and I don't want to completely delve into gossip TMZ world, but is there anything you could speak to, knowing what you know about what was going on in January of 69 around that time, particularly with George and his personal situation? Because we know he walked out of the sessions, and lately, as Beatle people, we're coming more to the understanding that it wasn't just what was going on among the other Beatles that was informing maybe his actions that month. Maybe there was other things going on too. Is there anything you could speak to about that?
Well, this was before I went to live with them. I knew a lot more about them when I went to live with them. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I knew George actually better than Pattie at that time. I didn't really know Pattie. And when George had me said, did I want to live at Friar Park? I assumed Pattie knew I was coming. And I only found out sometime later that I walked in the door and she's like, oh my God, he's brought another woman home. So I didn't know a lot of what was going on personally with them at that time, but it was very common up until Yoko came on the scene for the women not to participate in much of what they did. So they didn't go to recording sessions. There was just a lot. And the way George phrased it to her was, it's a work thing and there's no audience.
For the rooftop.
Yeah, for the rooftops. So that's why she didn't go. But I didn't see her around that much at all during the time I was at Apple. I didn't know her that well. Maureen, she would come and go, but I still didn't even really see her. I didn't know her. I mean, both of them later became really good friends. But at that time I worked at Apple, not necessarily so.
Nancy, I know that at least as far as I know personally, it was the concert for Bangladesh. You were there at the concert. You were dating Carl Radle at the time. What was your earliest encounter with Beatle World as far as that goes, getting to know them or meeting them?
It was very limited. The only time I was around John or George was when Carl would play a track.
Like the All Things Must Pass sessions?
All Things Must Pass. And that's when I met Pattie on the All Things Must Pass and went up there and had dinner up at their house. We were renting a house up in Beverly Hills. Maybe you remember it, Chris? Mm-hmm. The house up there. And then on the John Lennon album, the rock and roll album, Carl played on a track or two there, and that's when I met John. So I was in the recording studio, and it was through Carl that I met John and George. And then, of course, we started to hang out a bit.
Yeah, the rock and roll album was cut when he was separated from Yoko. It was pretty much based on the West Coast at that time. First working with Spector, and then eventually not.
Right. Those are some crazy recording days. And, well, Chris remembers some of those sessions. They were just the most creative parties that I'd ever been to in my life.
Chris, you were around for the rock and roll sessions, were you?
You know, All Things Must Pass. He didn't do most of that in L.A., did he? Ringo,
no, it was all in England.
In L.A.
Yeah, all of it in England, but he did some sweetening here.
Yeah, he did sweetening, definitely.
He did the sweetening here in L.A. And then he was on the A&M lot with Dark Horse. So he started spending a lot of time. I guess that was during his breakup with Pattie when he started Dark Horse.
Right, 74.
It happened right before. But, you know, a lot of the studio thing goes back to the same story. Pattie didn't go, and I was hanging out with her. So I didn't go to the sessions during that time.
Mm.
Right. And I was always going to the sessions.
I know, because you weren't with Pattie.
Yeah, I wasn't with Pattie, and I was with Carl, and I would bring my crocheting and a lot of needlepoint. I mean, that sounds crazy for the 70s. And also I was embroidering people's jeans. You know, they go, oh, give me a flower. So during a session, I would put a flower on one of the backup singers' blue jeans, you know.
You just made me think of what would be a good confluence between you two, potentially, is 1970 All Things Must Pass sessions. I'm not sure how long you were living at Friar Park, Chris, but it was end of May that those sessions started for All Things Must Pass. And Carl is part of the ensemble that George has put together for the making of that album. Straight after the basic tracks are done for All Things Must Pass is when the Derek and the Dominoes project starts to come together, the Layla album. And I was wondering if either one of you has any kind of insights about here is this record dedicated to Eric's then unrequited love for George's wife. And what was going on there? Was that something you were all kind of like knowledgeable about? Oh my God, he's doing this.
It was actually awful.
Oh yeah?
To know the truth. I was helping out Derek and the Dominoes at that time, and was at the flat that they rented in London. And so I actually had to witness a lot of it. It was not comfortable for me. I don't think it was comfortable for anyone. I mean, George and Pattie were like brother and sister to me, so it was really hard for me to make that adjustment. So it was a very awkward time. Actually, I think George probably had a lot more grace than anybody did around that time.
Did you know Eric very well?
I knew Eric. Yeah, I met Eric through George before that. Right, the night actually I was moving to Friar Park, and I lived there for probably around 6 months, I think. It seemed longer. I don't remember anymore. But yeah, I knew Eric, and I liked Eric. I thought he was great. Did you know him, Nance?
I was around him a lot because of Carl.
Oh, yeah.
Being the bass player in Derek and the Dominoes, Carl and I finally started living with each other not long after they finished Derek and the Dominoes. And he played me the tracks, and I said, my God, I said, this is amazing. He said, well, they're really love letters. And I said, oh, I wish a man would write a love letter like that to me. And I said, who are they to? And he said, well, I can't tell you. I said, we're living together. What are you talking about? You can't. He said, well, it's still very hush-hush. And it's an affair that can't be talked about. I said, I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Who am I going to tell? Because he had gone to me, in Tulsa. And he said, well, Eric is in love with Pattie Harrison. And I went, oh, wow. I said, well, that's epic. And he said, yeah, the cover of Layla. Eric had taken Carl with him to go and look at the artwork, that artist's artwork in England. And Carl has, I still have them, all these 35 millimeter slides of the artist's studio. And if you really look at that piece of artwork, you could see Pattie, can't you? I mean, it's like this beautiful, romantic, sort of Modigliani, sort of romanticized version of a beautiful blonde-haired woman. And Carl said, yeah. I said, well, what's going to happen? He goes, I don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. It's like he didn't know. And I don't think he really did. The only people that knew, I think, were Pattie and Eric and George.
Well, not quite. All of the Dominoes knew. Everybody around the house knew because they would meet there, their rendezvous spots. So actually, Pattie has that painting in her living room, which is great. Yeah.
My God. I think she told me she does. When you're in Friar Park and you would walk up the stairs, on the first landing was that amazing Renaissance painting of a knight resting in the arms of his love, and she's holding the sword.
I don't remember that.
She's keeping vigil. Last time I saw Pattie, I asked her, I said, Pattie, what happened to that painting? Because when I went to Friar Park, it was an astounding love tribute to a woman who was keeping vigil while her knight was resting in her arms. And she said, I have it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she said, I have it. And it was huge. It was like one of these 9 by 7 feet type of things that you need quite a wall to put it on.
Email her about that.
You have the knight in the lady's arms. It was one of the most romantic, most beautiful Renaissance paintings. I don't know if it was Renaissance. It might have been like 1840s, that type of beautiful articulation.
So Nancy, a minute ago you said your reaction to hearing Layla was, I wish somebody would write a song like that about me. And eventually you did get your song from Paul, recorded by Ringo, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Not quite a Layla. But
no, it wasn't an album.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful, wonderful little song. I'm saying little. It was written by a Beatle. It was a wonderful song written by Paul. And we were in the studio with him and Linda while they were recording it. And it's lovely. It's like, is she everything they say she is? Yes, pure gold.
Oh,
the Rhoda Gravere album.
You know all the answers, Robert.
A few. But you guys were there. This is your lives. I'm just the guy looking through the keyhole, as it were. Speaking of songs dedicated to you, shall we go there?
Let's go to Miss Chris. Let's go to Miss Chris's plethora of love songs.
3.
So we can go chronologically.
chronologically, Pisces Apple Lady was first that Leon did. And then he wrote Hummingbird, which B.B. King recorded, probably most known. And he did, of course.
Leon wrote that?
Leon wrote that too, yeah.
Okay. Was this the same album he did that had Beware of Darkness on it?
Yes.
Leon and the Shelter People, I think?
I don't think Hummingbird was on there. I'm not sure. Come to think of it.
Okay, but we're talking roughly 70, 71, that period.
Yeah, well, it all happened during that period of time.
I think Hummingbird was on the first album entitled Leon Russell.
Well, it was during that time that he wrote it, and he was still recording. So, yeah, probably.
Yeah, in between Mad Dogs and him going solo.
Right.
And what did you think about that when you first heard that?
Which one? Hummingbird?
The one that Apple Pisces Lady.
Pisces Apple Lady. Oh, I couldn't believe it because I went to the studio. I'd already kind of ditched him a few times. And
so this was him pursuing you?
This was him pursuing me. And he said he wrote it so that one day I would hear it and know how I felt. But I happened to go in the studio because he told me he was leaving and I felt so guilty. I thought, okay, I'm going to go in the studio and at least say goodbye. And while I was sitting there, they were recording it. So I kind of sat there and I heard the name and I thought, well, that's weird. That sort of fits. And then Denny Cordell asked Glenn Johns, what's the name of it? And then he said Pisces Apple Lady. And I went, dadgum, okay. Life changed.
Because you are a Pisces.
I am a Pisces. I worked at Apple.
March 1st?
March 2nd.
2nd, okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And then, of course, as your book was titled, Miss Odell, that was a song that George wrote. Have you got a little insight into the creation of that when that came out as the B-side of the Give Me Love single in 73?
Yes, I do. George had invited me out to the house he was staying at, the beach house. It was Rick Nelson's house in Malibu. And for some reason, probably drugs and alcohol, for some reason, he'd call me and I go, oh, yeah, I'm going to try to get out there. And then I didn't go. And it was probably a matter of maybe 3 or 4 days, but because usually that didn't happen. So when I finally got out there, he kind of went, oh, I've got something for you. And that scared me because, you know, George, Nancy, I thought if he comes out with a nightgown or lingerie, I'm going to go home. He was a rascal.
Or a room key.
So he actually played it on the guitar. And I was like stupid. You know, I think I said to him, oh, it makes me sound like a switchboard operator. Go figure.
Wow.
And then on the way home, I went, oh my God, this is kind of cool. And then he told me that he was going to put it on the B side. And I said, why not the A side? And he said, Capitol wanted him to put it on the A side because they felt it was good for his image.
Yes. Do you know anything about the recording and why it was issued? Because there's a clean take of it that's straightforward, but there's the one that everybody knows, which is him cracking up repeatedly through it. And at the very end, he gives out Paul McCartney's phone number.
If you really listen, you'll hear him talk about the rice rolling up upon the shore or something like that. He got the words confused, literally. And he started laughing, and I guess he just didn't quit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
it's great. And you're right. It's something that when he's got this very solemn, pious image publicly, putting out something silly like that would have totally changed the impression for sure. So we've got a bunch of questions coming in here. Ken is asking, why did Chris live at Friar Park? Same question Pattie had.
Actually, I had just come back to London after being in LA with Leon, and I was getting settled. I really didn't have a place at that point, and George just called me up. Alan Klein didn't want to bring me back to Apple, so Neil Aspinall was trying to protect me. And George called me up. I was at Doris Troy's house, and he said, would you like to come and live at my house and help me out there? I've got it too. My dog will start barking. And, I was like, well, I don't know. Is Neil going to be upset? And he said, no, it's okay. I've talked to him. So I went to the studio and met him and Kevin, who was yesterday. And they drove me to Friar Park. And I just stayed there. And all I did there was, you know what it was? That it was so big. They just needed people around. They had no heating.
Right. Kevin has described that too.
Right. They had little heaters, electric heaters in every room. But you had to sit. I laid right on top of mine the first night. It was so cold.
Wow. He moved in March, I believe, 1970. So this was some point pretty early on.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, they hadn't been there that long.
Joe wants to know if you were living there the same time as Bobby Whitlock.
No.
Okay.
No. I knew him from the Dominoes. In fact, we're still friends today, but no, we didn't live there at the same time.
Were you still working for Apple when you were living there?
I was still working for Apple. I got my paycheck through Apple, but it really saved my job there for probably another period of time, because once I went back to Apple, they fired me.
And that was Klein's doing, right?
Yeah, George called me up. I was sitting with Richard DeLello in the press office, and George called me and said, I just want you to know you're going to get fired, but this is for the best. Okay. And it took them a whole month to actually do it. I would call up and go, do you need to see me? Do you want to see me?
Wow.
I think I spent almost every day I was there out at Eric's house, that I was still on the Apple payroll, just hanging out.
Tough gig. Somebody's asking, Chris, did you know Francie Schwartz during her brief time at Apple?
I did. In fact, I lived in her flat on the Kings Road once we met, and I'd just been there, and she was living at Paul's. So I went over, I hung out with her. I mean, two Americans. So I hung out at Paul's house with her quite a lot. I know her pretty well.
You guys stay in touch?
No, haven't stayed in touch. In fact, I went to Ireland to get my work permit sorted out. When I came back, she was gone.
Oh.
Yeah.
Have you ever read her book?
I have not.
Okay. It's called Body Count, and it was published by Straight Arrow Books, it's Rolling Stone, Jan Wenner, in the early 70s. And I think it was still during the period where he was very much John Lennon's guy, often at the expense of Paul. So it's a very unflattering book toward Paul, particularly the chapter where she describes their life together, their dating period there. It's not typically recommended by many people, and it's very expensive if you can find a copy.
You know, I went over there one day to Paul's house, and she wasn't in the room, and he said, how do I get rid of her? I'm like, well, call her.
Men are such chickens, aren't they? They skip the ones to say, it's over. I'm leaving. You're leaving. It's over. You know, they have to push a woman into hysterics to press the button. Not you, Robert.
Oh, no. Wasn't it Phil Collins that got rid of a wife by fax? You ever hear that story?
No.
Well, yeah. Which wife?
I think number 2.
Would that be Jill?
Maybe. I'm not sure of the names.
Yeah.
Somebody is asking what you know about May Pang. I know Nancy, you knew her quite well. Chris, I'm not so sure. What can you tell us about how you connected and how that all played out?
Well, I met May through John. John came to LA. He'd had his sort of sabbatical from Yoko, and May was taking care of everything for him. And that's when we met May. May was sort of the go-to girl, everything girl for setting up studio appointments, setting up places to live, how to take care of John. That's when I met May. That was like in 74.
That was when they connected you, right? That was May and John's doing in May of 74.
Yes, that was before I got together with Richard. That was Ringo, Richie. I was working for Lou Adler, trying to get my footing in LA of who's who at the zoo. And because I'd been to sessions with John, I bumped into them, and John said, well, will you come and hang out with us, because we don't want you to get in with the wrong people. And I said, oh, okay. So I started hanging out with John and May, and that's how I met May, through John.
Speaking of Lou Adler and A&M Studios, I don't know if you or either one of you can speak to this, but it was in 73 that George got pulled into a Cheech and Chong session for Basketball Jones. Do you guys know anything about that?
Oh my God, I don't remember that. I mean, of course, Cheech and Chong were like the number one guys. Aside from Carole King was still in the top 100 albums, for Tapestry, who he produced and was on our roster. And there was Stefano and Gia Morisi and, oh my God, some great jazz people. And then there was Cheech and Chong were on the rise. I don't remember them pulling in John. Maybe it was when...
George.
Oh, they pulled in George?
Yeah. Are you familiar? You guys know the song Basketball Jones because it was a single?
Yeah, but I didn't know George was on it.
Oh, yeah. He plays the lead guitar on it. I guess he was at A&M Studios, and they just knocked on the door. Hey.
He was one floor below us. Dark Horse was one floor below us, and they were setting up, and then we were one floor up. So, and it was like a college campus or high school campus, A&M Records. So I can see where they would have pulled him in. So while he's parking his car and saying, "Hey, man, come and play on our record." George goes, "Oh, okay."
Right. Not knowing who Cheech and Chong are, but it's cool.
Oh, my God. They were amazing.
Actually. Yeah.
Another question that somebody had sent here, and that is, did you ladies know Olivia?
Yes.
Actually, yeah. I met her when I went to Dark Horse. I was touring with Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, their reunion tour in 1974, if you think about that.
Reunion.
That was their reunion. And from there, I went to England. And George asked me if I'd met Olivia. He'd been talking to her on the phone. And he asked me when I went back if I would go and take a picture of her and send it to him. I didn't do that.
Oh, okay.
I didn't do that.
To be protective of Olivia?
Didn't seem important.
Oh, okay.
What can I say?
Despite the man who wrote a song about you asking you to.
I'm not going to be taking pictures of other women for him.
This is totally not creepy.
How were you going to send it? We didn't have internet back then, right?
Yeah, I have no idea back then.
I was working upstairs at Ode Records, and I remember they were saying, George is coming to Dark Horse. He's going to put Dark Horse here. And I said, oh, and then I heard them saying who they were going to assign to him for a secretary in his office. And it was Olivia Arias.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how she got, because she was in the pool at A&M. So that's how she got in the office at A&M.
Wow.
That's interesting. It was fated, I guess, huh? Because they met and that was the end of that story.
Oh, yeah. He took her on the road. She was supposed to man the office. And he said, no, you're coming with me.
Yeah, on the Dark Horse tour.
Yeah. She gave him a kid who looked like he fell out of his back pocket.
Yeah.
So we're getting questions about Friar Park. I'm sure both of you can address this. A couple of people are asking if Mel Evans hung out there much. Another is asking if John ever visited Friar Park. And there's also a question here about it being haunted, any ghost sightings. So Frankie Crisp, perhaps.
Well, yes, Mal would be there. He was there a lot, especially because the period of time I lived there was when Paul quit the band.
Mm-hmm.
So Mal was out a lot during that period of time. George didn't have his studio going so much then.
Are you saying that like they were connected, Mal being there when Paul quit?
Well, I think he was there that day, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
I think he came out that day.
Do you have any impressions of that day?
Yeah, I definitely do. I woke up and came downstairs and Pattie got me in the kitchen and said, something terrible's happened. And there were papers all over the long sort of picnic-like table that was in there. And then she told me that Paul had done an interview and quit the band. My memory of that is that George was with Terry Doran in the garden a lot in the morning. And then John came over without Yoko, which was the first time I'd seen John without Yoko, maybe ever.
Wow.
Since I'd been there. So it was a pretty heavy-duty day.
Wow. And do you remember the demeanor of John and George? Were they seeming upset or matter of fact?
They went off into the grounds and just talked together. I mean, not in front of anybody. They did their talking all alone. So I have no idea what they were discussing. But it was apparent to me at that time that for John to come to Friar Park without Yoko meant that it was very intimate. It was an intimate time for them.
Wow. Yeah, had you ever been to Tittenhurst?
Yes. Yes, I was at Tittenhurst too.
Okay. Were they very close by?
It's hard to keep all those houses together, you know. Were they close by? No, they weren't really. I mean, they were in maybe 45-minute drive, maybe longer.
Nancy, Ringo eventually bought it. I know he was occupying it for a time after John moved to America. Did you have any experiences there?
The only experience I had at Tittenhurst Park was it was closed down. He was separated from his wife, and we went to Tittenhurst Park it was in springtime. It was really beautiful. I mean, the history of Tittenhurst Park is amazing. It's a man who traveled the world, who brought back trees from all over the world and planted them in Tittenhurst Park. I mean, there's a thing called the monkey puzzle tree. I guess you heard about that, Chris. The monkey puzzle tree, which can only be found in the South Pacific. There were 2 or 3 of them there, 4 of them there.
Wow.
And it was a tree park that was created in love by this man who started Tittenhurst Park. And Ringo was separated from his wife. I think we were engaged at the time. And we went out there to look at it, and it was all boarded up because it was going to go on the market, and there was a whole bunch of legal hullabaloo about it. But it was magnificent, the grounds. It was 80 acres of this tree park, and we drove around in this Range Rover that belonged to the groundskeeper. And I said, oh my God, why are you getting rid of this? And he said, I have to. And with a park like that, a person back in the 1850s or 60s, they had like their own little village. There was like a little street of where everybody who worked on the property lived, from the cook to the groundskeeper to the blah, blah, blah. And then there was a gatehouse. And I said, well, let's just keep the gatehouse, because the gatehouse was magnificent. Mm-hmm. It was like a 3-bedroom, magnificent thing just off the road structure. But yeah, I had been to Tittenhurst, but I never went inside. I'd only walked around it, and mainly through the grounds.
Interesting. Can either one of you speak to, going back to Friar Park, any sort of sense of it being haunted?
Absolutely. No doubt. I mean, Terry Doran, who was working for George at that time and living there, he came down one day. He was ashen, saying, I just saw something on the galley. And he wasn't kidding. He was serious. And so the story was that, yeah, it was a pretty amazing place. In fact, when Nancy was talking, I thought, yeah, Tittenhurst was amazing. But since I'd already been at Friar Park is like super amazing. So Tittenhurst just looked like a house.
It was Georgian manor. It was a Georgian proper, sort of like, it was like right out of Jane Austen. Whereas Friar Park was phenomenal. It was built by these monks, and all of the symbolism and the magic and the religious, even the doorknobs, right, Chris? Even the doorknobs had little guys' faces on them. And not to mention the grotto below it. I mean, it was...
Which you've got beautiful pictures of in your book, A Dose of Rock and Roll.
Yeah, I even have more pictures that I've never put out, but it was magnificent. It was magnificent.
It was. Well, actually, can I just make one slight correction? Sir Frank Crisp is the one that had it built. And he was an eccentric, beyond eccentric.
Right. And then the friars took it over.
And the nuns took it over during World War II. In fact, when we went there, we were still seeing when I moved in, we were still talking to the nuns, trying to figure out how things originally were, because that was George's whole idea, was to bring it back to the original state that Sir Frank Crisp wanted it in. So there were remember the caves? Nancy's got a great picture in the caves under the house.
Unbelievable.
The Matterhorn.
The Matterhorn, you would get into these stalagtite caves and get on a boat, like a 4 or 5 passenger boat, and just push your way out, and you would go through and come out onto the lake. Just magical.
Have you ever seen the video he did for the Cole Porter song True Love from the 33 1/3 album?
Oh, he did that with Ringo and Barbara too, didn't he?
I think that was Paul with Broad Street. I'm talking about George, and he's wearing a boater, and there's a little scene in that clip where it's like he's coming out of a tunnel of love in a little boat. I'm just wondering if that was what you're describing at Friar Park.
Yeah, definitely.
Exactly what would have been an exit out of the caves.
Yeah, okay.
The problem was, if you lived there long enough, you became very weird.
What are you saying about Danny and Olivia?
It's like, my God, the first time I left there, it was like, oh my God, who are all these weird, normal people? Because we had gotten so used to living in that fairy tale kind of place. You know what I mean, Nance? It was like...
I do. It was a magnificence of a bygone era. And it was almost like, somewhere in time where once you're there for a period of time, I was just there for an evening and a dinner and an afternoon. And by the time we left there, they said, oh, spend the night. And we said, no, we're going to get back in the car and drive into London, which was a good ways away on those country roads. It was like, we're driving back. I don't even remember the drive back to the Savoy Plaza, wherever hell we were staying. But it was like, my God, I felt like we sort of like broke through a film to get out of the magic of the castle. Mm-hmm. It's fantastic.
Wow, that's amazing. Very cool. Question for Nancy. Did you ever notice Richard practicing his kit at all?
Very seldom. We always had a kit set up in the house, and he would have musicians over who were going to play on sessions with him, and they would get in and they would work out the song. But as far as him practicing, The man was amazing. He would just sit down and think, I said, why don't I ever see you practice? His son, Zach, was the one who was always practicing when he was visiting. He would be in there and have the greatest drummers in the world giving them their licks, from Steve Gadd to his father to, well, you name
Keltner,
it.
Keith Moon.
Thank you. Jim Keltner was constantly giving his magic. But Richard never sat down. I said, why don't you practice? He said, what do I have to practice for? We get in and we play the song and I play. I went, oh, okay.
That's something that I've seen him talk about in interviews, is that as a drummer, he doesn't see the point of playing without other people.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I kind of get that.
Because you mean pianists practice? I mean, when I was with Carl Radle, he would sit for hours with headphones that looked like this, like he was bringing in a plane, headphones like this, and he would sit for hours and listen to the staple singers, Aretha Franklin, a lot to do with Duck Dunn, because he was so into Duck Dunn. Just playing, just sitting there with his headphones on. I would be cooking dinner and cleaning the house, and he'd be there silent, just playing along with these incredible tracks, but not Richard.
Well, it's interesting. I could see it as a pianist or a guitarist, because that is a soloist instrument. You could play just that. Yeah. And drums is in support of everything else. So maybe you don't want to go off on your own because it just feels so naked, Drums
are kind of like they jump on the train that's already moving.
There you go. Speaking of making music, we have a question here from Orion. For either of you, did you know Dino Radle? He was the producer of Phoebe Snow.
Oh, yeah. I remember. Do you remember him? Dino was at Shelter Records.
He was at Shelter. I met him once, but I knew Phoebe much better.
Yeah, I remember him.
Go, Chris.
Well, I don't know what to say other than I met him at Shelter more than a couple times, and he was a really nice guy, and he produced Phoebe, and that's about all I can tell you.
Okay. To either of you, being in the proximity that you were, was there any discussion you were aware of with George or Ringo about the Beatles getting back together at any point when you were around them?
You go, Nance.
Well, when we were together, like every week, there was an offer on the table, and the boys would get together on phone calls. They're offering us a huge amount of money to play Shea Stadium. Oh, they're offering us a huge amount of money to play some sort of stadium, to get together to one last concert. But none of it ever stuck. Because at that time, in the early 70s, Paul was doing his thing. George was doing his thing. John was definitely doing his thing. And Richard was doing his thing. So it was like for them all to get together and mesh and do it, none of what was coming in was enough to make them say, yeah, let's do it.
You're talking about the offers weren't enough, or they just weren't feeling it at that particular moment because of what they had right in front of them?
And I don't think the timing was right. Ringo was like into the stratosphere, as Chris knows, first out of the gate before John or Paul or George. With the Ringo album, he was the first out of the gate. So his trajectory was really fast and hard. And Chris should know because she took care of us for a lot of it, as far as getting us from point A to point B. And Paul was wings across America. John was producing so much. It was like that Lost Weekend, which is a bunch of baloney. It was probably his most creative time of his life to produce and to give to others before he did Double Fantasy, which is one of my favorite albums in the world.
You are yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Plus, he was also clean during most of that period of time. He wasn't doing drugs or drinking during the time he was doing Harry Nilsson's album.
Yes. No.
The only one that was together. Everybody else in the house was not together.
I know. Every time I went to a John session, he was the one who was in control and he was not doing the naughty things. And he was hurting the rest of the cattle. It's true.
And you have the results to show for it, given that period of productivity where he does an entire album of original material that has a number one hit single and goes to number one, producing Harry, working with Ringo, doing 2 number one hits, one with Elton John, one with David Bowie during that time. Yeah, just amazing stuff. But it seems like in a lot of people's minds, as well as John describing it afterward, that night at the Troubadour He's using it as like the defining experience when he's drunk with Harry on Brandy Alexander's and gets tossed out, as if that represented the entire period. And May Pang would tell you different, and so do you.
Yeah, I was there the night at the Troubadour, and Harry was drunk on Brandy Alexander's. John was like trying to control the situation. Harry was the one heckling the Smothers Brothers, and John excused himself and went to the phone booth at the Troubadour and had like this 45-minute phone call with his wife, Yoko, at the phone booth at the Troubadour. And he came back and he goes, "Mother." And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Let's leave." But before he left, he went into the ladies' room and put 25 cents in and got a Kotex and put it on his head. So whatever the conversation was between him and Yoko, it was like, not only women bleed, right? And he walked out of the Troubadour, and May and I were like, "What's he doing?" Because he knew, he was so brilliant, as you know, Chris. He was so brilliant. He knew the photographers would get that, and it would be a private message to his wife. It was amazing. It was like, oh my God, I just went the other way and got in my little car and left.
I've got a question here that is something I heard discussed in various things in the last year. There was the Pattie Boyd birthday party at Friar Park in March of 70. This was the occasion that all four Beatles were there together. Chris, do you want to talk about that? Is that something you can describe?
Yeah, my memory is that they were all four there. It was very much, when Brian Epstein was alive, they were kept pretty much, what's the word? I mean, they didn't get out. They didn't meet a lot of people. They had a very small network of friends, their inner group. That's what that party was. It was Apple people, not Apple employees, but, Neil and Peter Asher and everything. And it was Pattie's idea because she loves a party. And George wasn't that hot on it. But, the first thing that we did is they took them down into the caves, which freaked a few people out.
It could be a freaky place.
Well, somebody got really freaked out. She started freaking out. But anyway, so it was just a very casual night in the big room in front of the fireplace. There wasn't much furniture there. So a lot of people were sitting on the floor. But it's probably the most intimate group that I had imagined before I knew them.
So this being then when they moved to Friar Park in 70 and March was Pattie's birthday, in your recollection, Paul was there and presumably he was there with Linda as well.
That's my recollection, yeah.
Uh-huh. And the questions come up for both of you, just your impressions of Linda. Were you particularly close to her?
We got close because we're both from Tucson, or she lived in Tucson,
there.
Went to the U of A, and it's where she started photography. So the first time that I met her was at the studio, a James Taylor session at Trident Studios. And we kind of connected because of Tucson. And then after that, she didn't really know anyone. So she would call me at Apple and say, "Do you want to go shopping? Do you want to do this?" And I spent a Thanksgiving with them. I spent a lot of time with her in the beginning. But after they got married and got into their own things, then I didn't see her that much. So, my impressions at first were, this is an unusual match. And then later...
Did you think Paul had a type?
Well, not really. If you think of Jane Asher, Francie Schwartz, and Linda, it'd be hard to say. But I got to know her less, let's put it that way. And then I just was under the impression Linda just became so much like Paul. It was like, that happens, the Liverpool accent and everything like that. So it was then I felt like I was speaking to the same person all the time. Over to you, Nance.
Well, I think I had spent a little time around Linda in New York for a little while, an afternoon, had tea in our hotel at the Plaza. And then after that, they wrote that great song for me. And then in LA for a little while. But Linda and Paul, what I loved about them was that he accepted her as a woman. He took her as an equal. They created their own world, their own little bubble, and they kept creating in it. And they had children and they created music, and he brought her in, which is a hard thing for a Liverpool man to do, as we know, because they're such misogynistic buttheads. What have I said? But it's hard for them. I mean, even Maureen, going through everything with Maureen, Maureen kept trying to be accepted by her husband, to let her be herself and do her thing. When I took over, I was going through the same thing. It was like, hey, but Paul and Linda found that magic of sharing, exploring, and creating together, which I was hoping it would rub off on the drummer, but it didn't. Oh dear, I've said it all now.
Okay, let's backtrack a little bit. I have a question here. Both of your impressions of Concert from Bangladesh. Any special memories?
Well, I have a few special memories that stand out, but one is that when I got there, I stayed with George and Pattie in their suite. And the first show, we went to rehearsal, and of course, I was highly distracted because Leon Russell was there. So I still had my broken heart. So I was pretty distracted by that. But Pattie and I decided not to go to the afternoon show. Actually, going back to that, at the rehearsal, there was a big question whether Bob Dylan was going to show up for the rehearsal. He was due and he hadn't come. And there was a journalist called Al Ronowitz who was in touch with him. And Bob did show up, and there was like this sigh of relief. It was, he was kind of like the king of the show. And then Pattie and I didn't go to the afternoon show. And when George came back between shows, he brought Bob with him. So they sat and talked about what was going on and everything. And then we all went back. I think he left, and then we all went back to the concert. Pattie and I sat in the first couple rows, I think. And it was like your child. We'd watch George go through all the planning, and his heart was in the right place. He wanted to raise this money. And it was like watching your child in a school play. That's probably not quite a good analogy, but you know, how you go, oh my God, that's so great. I'm so proud. And Pattie definitely felt that way. We were just so proud of him that he had pulled it off. It was the first of its kind in many ways.
Sure, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Nancy, you were there.
I was there, and it's really crazy. Someone just sent me just in the last month, some footage of me walking backstage with Carl, because there was Carl and who was a great bass player on Revolver.
Klaus?
Klaus Bormann.
So it was Carl and Klaus and Carl was with Leon and Eric. And then there was Klaus, who was like part of the Beatles from the beginning. And there's some great footage walking backstage of me and Carl, and then walking, was it Les Blanc did the movie, I think? And then right behind us is Ringo with his black hair and his black jacket. It was sort of a goth thing going on, putting on his beard. And I thought to and there I am in like blue jeans and this beautiful little knitted top, just like a 70s girl. And I'm thinking, oh my God, there I was walking 10 feet in front of the man I was going to be engaged to, and I had no idea.
Do you remember having any exchanges with him for that event? Yeah.
Whatsoever. But the great thing that happened was that Carl talked to Pattie, because we had gotten off a plane with Leon and I had no baggage. So I had on like blue jeans and this wonderful purple knit top, crocheted top or something. And he talked to Pattie, and Pattie goes, well, have her come up to the suite where you were staying, Chris. And she laid some things on the bed for me to take my pick of something to wear for the concert. And I looked at all these beautiful clothes, and I was so intimidated that I went, that's okay, I'll just wear what I have. So I stayed in my blue jeans and my little knit top and a scarf. And I left behind these like Moroccan skirts and these, things with spangles and everything. And I was thinking like, she said, oh, take whatever you want and keep it. I don't mind. And I went, wow. And then I remembered sitting behind, I think it was you, Chris, and Pattie and Maureen. The ladies were up in the balcony just above the stage. I was sitting right behind with a few other women. And I was thinking like, God, these women are so glamorous. Oh, I wish I'd taken that Moroccan skirt and worn it. What an idiot.
Chris, you might be aware of this, being as you were staying with Pattie and George. Were you privy to any of the discussion going on, apparently up to the 11th hour, about whether John was going to participate or not? And then he ended up taking off going to Paris or something.
Yeah, there was discussion around that for sure, because I think there was a question whether he was going to come. But that one seemed to be done before, was Eric going to make it? Mm-hmm. And how do we get drugs for him, and was Bob Dylan to show up. So, I mean, there were a couple of those things going on. I think it was kind of a snub, actually, to tell you the truth. I think it was a snub to George that he left.
I think he flew to Paris, but he left Yoko behind, which was pretty interesting. And Ray Connolly, the journalist who I guess was hanging with them, tells the story of Yoko saying to him, well, John left his clothes here, so take anything that fits. And he said, I got to be a Beatle for a day, walking around in John's clothes. So kind of interesting. It's funny you talk about the scoring heroin for Eric, because...
Did I say that?
No, you did not.
Okay. May have read it somewhere in a book written by somebody.
Robert, don't try and set her up.
Okay. We had somebody on the show earlier today whose sister worked at ABCO and was very much a part of the setup of the concert for Bangladesh, and talked about being a gopher that day that he didn't want any part of. So it aligns with something I heard or read somewhere.
No, it is absolutely a fact. They didn't know if he'd make it on the flight from London. That was the big problem, to get him from London to New York with no drugs and having it ready for him as soon as he got there. So he didn't have to withdraw.
On the subject of Eric and Pattie, we've got questions here about the celebration in 1979 when they did get married and they had the little all-star party. First of all, Nancy, were you there? And second of all, Ringo was.
No.
Well, there's a picture of Ringo and Paul and George taken there, so we know that Ringo was there.
No,
and there was.
You mean the one in Tucson?
No, the one at Eric's place.
That wasn't the wedding. That was the
reception. Yeah.
Yeah. At what's this place called? I forgot it already. Hurtwood Edge.
Oh yeah, Eric's place.
Yeah, that was the party after a month or so after the tour ended.
Right, because they got married while he was on the road, and then they had the party afterward.
They got married in Tucson. I was a bridesmaid.
Wow.
But I wouldn't participate in the wedding because I was afraid Eric would give me a hard time. He wasn't very nice all the time.
I was at the party at Hurtwood Edge.
Good. That's what I was wondering.
Party. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of people. I remember there was this, sitting on the stairs, I was walking around with Pattie, and I was like the American girl who was like, the bitch who stole Ringo from Maureen, right? So I was sort of like, not too many people would talk to me. And I was in like, my little denim stuff and a denim golf hat and just like walking around having a white wine. And I saw this incredible blonde woman sitting on the stairs holding court. And she had on she looked like a gypsy. She looked like she would say, cross my palm with silver and I'll read your palm, I'll read your future. And I'm just looking at going, blonde hair and a scarf around her neck tied tight and like a gypsy. And I said to Pattie, I said, who's that amazing woman? And she said, oh, that's Anita Pallenberg. And I went, Anita Pallenberg? This woman was missing half her teeth. I mean, you think of Anita Pallenberg, you think of this beautiful blonde goddess from the 60s, 70s. And I went, wow, who had been giving birth to children for Keith Richards. And I said, wow. So I remember going over and sitting on the steps and looking at her, and I said, I have loved you for years. And she looked at me and she said, why? And I thought, oh, sorry to bother you. I'm just going to go over there and go to the bathroom. It's like, she silly just said, you're full of shit. Get away from me. But I was like, okay, all right. Another myth busted.
People are wondering, because of a conspicuous omission that John wasn't there, if there was any insight into why that would have particularly been. I think Pattie said in her book it was because they simply forgot to invite him or didn't think he could travel out of the States because he didn't have a green card or something like that. Anybody have any knowledge of that or any discussion of that?
Not really.
Yeah.
No, I think it was just whoever was in the area and who could get there. Paul wasn't there.
At the party he was.
Was he?
Yeah, he was, yeah. There's a picture of him with George and Ringo and Lonnie Donegan. You might remember him being there as well.
Oh, my God. And, when you get to be this age, a lot of stuff kind of...
That's what they say about the 60s. I think it's probably applicable to the 70s as well.
I don't... the 60s, we did light drugs. The 70s, that was a lot heavier. Much heavier drug scene at that
They say if you remember the 60s, you weren't there.
But if you remember the 70s, you weren't there either.
Yeah. Oh, boy, do we remember the 70s, Chris.
Speaking of Santa Monica in 74, those pictures that were taken when Paul was visiting town, and there's a few shots, I know that May Pank took at least one of them, of John and Paul sitting together in the backyard. Were either of you present for that?
No.
Was that at the beach house?
Yes.
Yeah, I was there then.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was in 74. Those are dated too. That was when he was up for the Oscar for Live and Let Die. And he was in town for that. But for as many moments as they might have spent together before John died, that's the last pictures we've ever seen of them together.
Wow.
In the 76 tour, when Wings are doing their shows ending in LA, were you there, Nancy, when Ringo came out and gave Paul the flowers?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
It was an amazing night because we walked down through the audience, through this incredible arena. We walked down, and as people saw that it was him, they started screaming, "Ringo, Ringo, Ringo." And my arm was in his, and I let go, and he just sort of, Chris, as you do, he just sort of like walked like a matador through pulling in all the energy he could from the crowd. It was fun.
That same year, were either of you at the last waltz?
No.
I was. Well, there's a whole chapter in my book on the last waltz because I sneaked in a Polaroid camera with about 20 packs of Polaroid film.
Oh.
And I was backstage taking pictures of everybody when no cameras were allowed. And people would say, "Give me that photograph." I'm like, "Okay, here you go." 8 out of every 10 I took, I kept. I think I got the only picture of Bob Dylan smiling in his life.
Oh, wow. That was then at the last waltz?
The last waltz.
Wow, how cool. So we have a question here. How well did either of you get to know Yoko?
I knew her through Apple mostly. I didn't know her that well. No, to me, she wasn't that easy to know. But Nancy probably had more interaction with her because of when you were with Ringo, right? I didn't have a lot of social interaction with her.
I did. We were in New York, staying at the Plaza. Ringo was doing the album with Arif Mardin. And we were invited over for drinks or lunch or something over to the Dakota. And that's when I first met Yoko. And she was incredibly nice and almost like a Japanese courtesan. She was like so sweet. And that's when Sean was like 2 years old and he was like climbing around the kitchen and John was making bread. And it was all very family oriented and very wonderful. And then John said, "Well, we're going to walk outside and go to our favorite Chinese restaurant." But before we left, I noticed when I walked into everything was white carpet, white loose-side chairs with white fur seats, and everything was like white. I remember walking into the foyer into their apartment, and there was this, under plexiglass was this mummy, an Egyptian mummy. And I was struck by how much it looked like Yoko, the mummy. And I went, "God, it looks like it." So we went inside and I said to John, "John, that mummy looks so much like Yoko." And he said, "Believe me, don't tell her, but they know how to deal with her in Egypt." So what happened was that he said, "Honey, why don't you bring out some of your Egyptian jewelry and show Nancy?" Because I love jewelry. So she brought out these black velvet trays, and here was the most amazing Egyptian jewelry that was probably should never have been taken out of Egypt, or maybe it was fake. I don't know. The most amazing Egyptian jewelry. And we were like, Richard and I both, who Chris, he loved jewelry. We were like going like, "Holy crap, look at this stuff." And then she said, "Oh yes, I have people in Egypt who find stuff for me." And John looked over at me and goes, and I'm thinking like, I guess he's going back to the mummy. They say, "Oh yeah, put Yoko's face on the mummy and we'll sell it to her for $100,000 or something." I don't. So I said, "My God." So then we went around the corner a couple of blocks away and we were walking. Some people followed us and took pictures. There's pictures somewhere. And we went to this Chinese restaurant, which was just like a Chinese place that was, you order from a thing on the wall and the food was delicious. And that's the way they like to eat. John was very low key, whereas Ringo was like, "Let's go to Mr. Chow's, let's go to La Provence, let's go to here." he wanted to do the best, where John was like, a mattress on the floor and the best Chinese food out of a place with no tablecloths, and I'm fine. So that night with Yoko, she was very, very, very lovely. And the next day we went over for lunch, and I said, I hear you have offices here. And she said, oh, yes, come, I'll take you downstairs. And she took me downstairs to her office, which was probably like a 1-bedroom apartment in the Dakota. Mm-hmm. From floor to ceiling were filing cabinets. And I went, what is this? And she said, oh, I keep files on everybody. And I went, oh, okay. What does that mean? And she said, I have your astrological chart in one of these files. And I went, oh, okay. She was an amazing person, very low key. She appeared to be like a kabuki girl, but at the end of it, she was like the head of the CIA.
Getting back to that mummy, was it looking for its hand in the snow by chance?
What?
Don't worry.
Is that a comment by you or somebody out there?
Derek Taylor. Have you had any Derek Taylor stories?
Chris, take that one. You're the girl.
Derek is difficult to explain because he was so original. I mean, when I first met him, we sat and had drinks and went back up to his house, and he was in LA at that time. He was just ready to go back to London to work for the Beatles. But of course, it was really interesting to sit with him. He would tell stories about the Beatles. And, I don't know how it was for everybody else, but for me, the Beatles were like so far out of our reality. They were only what we saw on TV and what we heard on music. But the idea of them being real humans was pretty hard to imagine because it had been built up. So anyway, he would tell stories about, he would say, oh, well, George this. And it was kind of like, wow, this is so normal for him. Anyway, we went back to his house and he pulled out a joint and he said, oh, this is from Hawaii. I think it was called Hawaiian Ice or something like that. Oh my God, I'd never had anything like that strong in my life. But he was having a ball. He was just so amazing to be around. And he introduced me to a lot of music and a lot of people. And I was his driver for a while because his family had gone back to England and he didn't drive, thank God. So I drove him everywhere. So during the time I drove him, I met a lot of people and I had a really good time. And then he called me after he got back and said, you should come to London to Apple while it's still new, right here at the beginning. And I said, yeah, sure. But I was living with a lady he introduced me to called Terry Garr, who at that time was a kind of struggling actress. Mm-hmm. And she said to me, you've got to go. She talked me into it. So I did. I think because Derek brought me into Apple is why I was trusted to stay there I was his friend. So he was my, certification?
Your mentor.
Yeah, he was my mentor around Apple. Deeply missed by many.
Yes.
Speaking of Apple, we have a question here. What might your favorite Apple LP be?
That's interesting. Badfinger had a good one.
Oh, several. Which one are you thinking of?
I was thinking of...
Straight Up?
It had the majority of hits on it.
Yeah, that would be Baby Blue and Day After Day.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And then Doris Troy had an album that people hardly ever heard that was good.
Mm-hmm. James Taylor.
James Taylor is the one who came out of there, the biggest.
Yeah, produced by Peter Asher.
Mm-hmm. Billy Preston's was amazing.
Speaking of the 74 Dark Horse Tour, did you have anything to do with the setting up or handling of that?
I did all of the travel, and I went on as a tour manager. So I set up all of the logistics for it in terms of the band. Mm-hmm. And then there were three of us, Barry Imhoff, who was Bill Graham's partner, and Gary Schaffner, who was a guy I'd already, I think that maybe that's when I met him, or I met him on Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. We were kind of the team that they put together at Bill Graham Productions to tour. Mm-hmm. So we went out on that tour. That tour was amazing because we had all of the guys from India, all of Ravi's band, and then all of George's band. It was such a nice tour. And we had three kitchens that traveled separately. Bill Graham actually came up with 3 portable kitchens because the Indians would only eat Indian food. And George, he liked Indian food. So everywhere we went, the food was actually cooked right there by the chefs in the place. It was a pretty amazing tour.
I know that John had seen the tour in Nassau, and Paul saw it at Madison Square Garden, where him and Linda are wearing the disguises. I don't know about Ringo seeing the Dark Horse tour. Is that something you could speak to, Nancy?
I don't remember going to the Dark Horse tour with Ringo. I really don't remember. Do you remember if he went, Chris?
I remember John. I remember Paul.
I don't remember us going to the Dark Horse tour or Ringo going to it on his own. When was that tour? 73?
74. It was November, early December 74.
Early November.
You were together by then. I'm pretty sure you were.
Oh, yeah. Goodnight Vienna was just out.
In the fall, November to December, he was back in England with the kids.
For the holiday season?
For the holiday season, and plus he could only stay here so many months out of the year, and he was like really on a streak for the Ringo album.
Right.
And when he went back in November, we had gotten together, and then I was to find a house for us to live in when he came back after the New Year. So I think he was probably in England time.
Okay.
Right.
Any of you have any particular 70s memories or interactions with Mal Evans?
Yeah. 70s memories. I remember Mal from 68.
The LA period, I guess, is what we're speaking to.
Yeah. He was living up at George's house, the one they had that you came to, Nance.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a lot of memories of him up to the point of when he died. I remember Harry Nielsen sent the ashes to London or to England for them to get it, and it got lost in the mail. And they finally found it, his ashes.
Oh my God.
And Harry said they finally found it in the lost mail stuff.
Dead letter office?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
You didn't know that?
I didn't know that. Oh my God. I knew that did he marry Francine? Was her name Francine? Francie?
I don't think he
Fran Hughes. No, they never married.
They never married because I remember years later, I was looking to get a house and I called about this house and this woman met me at the house to look at it, and it was her, and she was into real estate. And I went, Francie. And they were in love at the time, but he still had a wife in England.
Yeah.
He came to LA and he really rode the ride.
It is kind of amazing when you think that this is the guy that produced Badfingers No Matter What, just timeless, evergreen, killer record, and wasn't really able to parlay anything off of that in terms of sustaining a career.
Yeah.
I think he had a hard time, basically. I mean, you saw Kevin yesterday and the thing we did. That's an example of what Mal was like, too. It was that loyalty, that absolute deep loyalty to the boys. Yeah. And, I don't know if he ever really was able to separate from that. I wish we had heard his book. It would have been the best book of all.
You're right. You're right, Chris. You're right. I mean, Mal was so many times there would be meetings and it would be said, call Mal, he'll take care of it. Call Mal, he'll take care of it. And Mal was the brute force that moved stuff. I mean, he knew where all the bodies were buried from the 60s on and probably dug the holes.
Right.
That's well said. Sorry, Mal.
He was a true knight, wasn't he? He was a true knight in this rock and roll royalty. He was a true knight.
Here's to Mal.
Yes. One final question I have. Somebody's asking about when George and Ringo worked on the song Photograph, and it became his first #1 hit single. There's obviously in the Let It Be film, you see a little bit of George helping him with Octopus's Garden, but it seems like having had this massive hit that was so important in Ringo's career, I don't think there's any examples of them songwriting again ever after. Is that anything anybody can speak to of why that wouldn't have been the case?
Of him songwriting?
Of Ringo and George collaborating like that again?
Didn't they work together on the album that Richard Perry did?
Yeah, that's the one, the Ringo album. That's where Photograph is from.
I don't know.
Yeah, George is all over that, but not on Goodnight Vienna at all.
And who did Back Off Boogaloo with him? Was that John?
No, that's George.
Yeah. It's very interesting how Ringo and George were very connected in the songwriting. And George was the most helpful to Ringo in writing songs and doing song credit. I mean, there were several songs that they wrote together besides Back Off Boogaloo and Photograph. And what was the other one?
Don't Come Easy.
Don't Come Easy. Oh my God, that was a hit before the Ringo album, wasn't it?
Right. Yep. 71.
Yeah. It was like, considering their past and what they'd gone through together, how this band of brothers, no matter what happened personally, they still had each other's back.
And that's something you guys were witness to when you did see the ex-Beatles interacting. You do get this sense that despite the fact that they never got back together, certainly as Beatles, that the brotherhood still existed.
George once said, nobody knows what it's been like except for the other three. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was pretty much, I mean, he'd talk about Hamburg and all those days. And I thought that pretty much said it, you know, that they had been through this amazing period of time together. And no one could possibly relate to it except them.
Right. I always thought of Ringo as the glue between the four of them. Because in those early 70s, I mean, granted, of all the four Beatles, Ringo broke out first. He came out like a shooting star, pardon the pun. And what was amazing was that if you look at his first two albums, the Ringo album, all four boys were together on the album, right, Robert?
Yeah, not on the same track, but on the album. Exactly.
All four of them contributed for their drummer. They all four contributed to make that album what it was. And then there was Goodnight Vienna, wrote the song of Goodnight Vienna. I mean, they were always, no matter what the hell was going on, I remember in the early days before the contract was signed to terminate Apple and the Beatles, I remember phone calls going back and forth. Paul would call Ringo, John would call Ringo, George would call Ringo. Our phone was like a roto dial of all four of these guys calling him, because I remember him saying, he said, when it all happened, when it all broke up, he said, I went to just sit in Tittenhurst and be quiet. He said, because I had no idea what I was going to do. Paul was doing Wings. John was doing this. George was already doing his thing. He said, and I didn't know what I was going to do. But all three of these guys came in and made it happen for him. He said, well, I want to do an album. And they said, well, we're there for you. It's amazing. It's definitely a band of brothers, rock and roll brothers, that took it to the next level for Ringo anyway, and for each other. I mean, you hear about him playing on albums for George, for Paul, for John, for, It's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. You've said it all. It's a beautiful thing, and that's why we're here.
Something About the Beatles, created and hosted by Robert Rodriguez, sponsored by BetterHelp. Go to betterhelp.com/Satby for 10% off your first month. Executive producer Rick Way. Title song by the Corgis.